Just moments ago, palace officials released news that had millions of subjects across Britain deeply concerned. King Charles's health, it was revealed, had suddenly and dramatically worsened. The announcement came directly from Sandringham, His Majesty's secluded Norfolk residence, where medical specialists had been working tirelessly. The official communiqué consisted of just 9 succinct words. His Majesty's condition is under intense observation. This brief yet potent statement plunged the entire world into a deep, uneasy silence. Meanwhile, outside the Sandringham Estate, a quiet, monotonous rain began to fall, as if nature itself echoed the pervasive gloom. At the black wrought-iron gates, where numerous press representatives had gathered, the rare clicks of camera shutters could be heard. Each flash pierced the gray air, reflecting off the impeccably polished royal crest, an emblem that on this day seemed incredibly heavy, symbolizing not just power, but also immense burden. This was far more than a typical official announcement. It was a clear harbinger of impending change, indicating that the monarchy stood on the threshold of a new, uncharted era. Sources close to Clarence House revealed that the monarch's private office had been cleared of most of his daily correspondence. His personal diary, which until recently was filled with entries of meetings and significant events, now lay open on his desk. The last line, penned by the king himself, read, "The burden continues." Even for those who had meticulously followed the royal family's ever-changing history for decades, the current atmosphere felt different. It was permeated by a distinct silence, portending something more final and irreversible. Soon after, unsettling rumors began to circulate, quickly confirmed by high-ranking aides. They reported that shortly before his condition worsened, the king had personally signed off on a final directive, a hermetically sealed document. It is presumed to contain his wishes in the event he could no longer properly fulfill his royal duties. This momentous document was believed to be accessible only to 3 individuals: Princess Anne, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Prince William. As of today, this letter is held in Sandringham's inviolable private vault. While its precise contents remain unknown to the public, a single phrase from an insider has already sparked a wave of apprehension across the country. This changes everything. As all of Britain paused in tense anticipation, only one agonizing question hung in the air. Was this the beginning of King Charles III's reign's twilight, or merely the fulfillment of a premonition the late Queen herself had so presciently foreseen? To fully grasp the depth and gravity of the moment that now gripped Britain, one must mentally transport back several months, long before the fateful day when the palace officially confirmed today's tragic news. It all began subtly, as precursors to major events often do, with barely perceptible shifts in the monarch's schedule and an unexplained increase in the private time allotted to the king. At the dawn of his reign, Charles had always adhered to a strict daily routine, which included daily letter writing, continuous briefings, invigorating walks through picturesque rural landscapes with his loyal dogs, and a nightly immersion in the contents of the famous red boxes. However, with the advent of the new year, noticeable gaps began to appear in his work schedule. Initially, this was seen as a perfectly reasonable approach to managing his energy. After all, Charles ascended the throne at a rather advanced age, having reached 73, and took on duties that, before him, had been performed with unwavering steadfastness and composure by a woman renowned for her phenomenal stamina. It seemed entirely logical to assume that his reign would differ from the previous one. However, behind the veil of public visibility, medical advisors were already sounding the alarm. The king was undergoing a relatively experimental course of treatment, a targeted immunotherapeutic trial specifically designed to halt the progression of a rare form of lymphoma. This critically important detail was carefully concealed from the wider public under the plausible pretext of routine health maintenance activities. The chosen location for this delicate treatment was Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, an institution justly renowned for its cutting-edge developments and achievements in cancer care. Only a select few, beyond the king's innermost circle, were aware of the frequency of his visits to this facility. He was often transported there discreetly by helicopter in the early morning hours to avoid unwanted public attention. What many perceived as ordinary country excursions were, in reality, carefully planned medical procedures conducted under strict medical supervision. At the very heart of the royal family, Queen Camilla assumed the role of an unyielding guardian and keeper of control. Her public persona, always supportive, consistently smiling, constantly present, artfully masked the true reality of how skillfully she managed both complex palace operations and shielded her husband from unwanted political and media interference. According to one former courtier, she controlled access with the vigilance of a hawk. No one could see the king unless she approved it, not even William. Meanwhile, Prince William began subtly yet steadily taking on more and more responsibilities. He led state visits, appeared at a significantly higher number of public engagements, and held private meetings with the Prime Minister. Most notably, he was present at the Commonwealth Leaders' Forum, an event traditionally attended by the reigning monarch. The palace attempted to explain this as shared responsibility. However, for those privy to the intricacies of palace life, it was abundantly clear that William wasn't merely stepping in for someone. He was actively assuming responsibility. Behind all these events, a figure whose role proved truly central was operating subtly but confidently. Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, known for her shrewdness, unwavering devotion to the monarchy, and ability to remain composed in the most challenging circumstances, Princess Anne served as a kind of link between the glorious past and the rapidly changing present. It was her mission to visit the personal archive of the late Queen Elizabeth II, a collection of documents and relics rarely open to outside eyes and carefully preserved within the walls of Windsor Castle. There, among numerous mementos of a bygone era, she discovered a letter believed to have been written by Her Majesty's own hand shortly before her passing. The precise contents of this confidential message remain a mystery, but one phrase, it is said, was specifically highlighted by Elizabeth herself, underlined in her own hand. Should duty ever outweigh health, let clarity protect the crown. In early September, Princess Anne personally delivered this letter to His Majesty King Charles. According to a source close to the court, the king read the message twice, then thoughtfully set it aside and uttered only a few words. She always knew. From that moment on, courtiers observed distinct changes in the king's demeanor and habits. Charles became unusually quiet, his gaze often distant, lost in deep thought. His Majesty's desk, which could once be cluttered with papers and documents, was now impeccably clear. He began answering phone calls less frequently, and spent more time gazing thoughtfully out of the tall windows of Sandringham's north wing, the very room where Queen Elizabeth II once signed official state documents in the early years of her reign. Around this time, rumors of a sealed directive began circulating actively within court circles. It was presumed to be a document, handwritten by King Charles himself, rather than typed, outlining his wishes should his health render him unfit to continue performing his monarchical duties. Sources close to the palace claim this message was placed in an elegant cedar casket and securely hidden in a private vault located beneath Sandringham Chapel. Currently, only 3 individuals definitively know the contents of this document, and remarkably, as of this morning, all 3 are in the same room. It seems all pieces of the complex puzzle have fallen into place. The crown may not yet have passed to another, but something fundamentally changed at the very heart of the monarchy. The king's voice had grown softer, but his decisions, it seemed, had gained even greater weight and resolve. The first public indication that something truly unusual was unfolding came not in an official statement, but in a fleeting moment captured by cameras during a charity reception in early September. King Charles, always known for his impeccable composure and grace, stumbled slightly while greeting the Ghanaian ambassador. His face, usually vibrant and warm, appeared drawn, and his voice was much softer than usual. Royal commentators and journalists were quick to attribute the incident to the monarch's usual fatigue, yet aides behind the scenes knew better. His Majesty had not slept for 3 days. Exactly 1 week later, during what was expected to be a private weekend at his Sandringham country residence, palace vehicles were spotted arriving in the late-night hours, their presence unusual and raising questions. Among the convoy, an unmarked medical van stood out, followed by a car typically reserved for the king's personal physician. Despite these alarming signs, press representatives received the standard phrasing they had become accustomed to over months. The king is resting. However, within the majestic estate's walls, Rest was the last thing anyone present could claim. It was Princess Anne, renowned for her resolve, who finally broke the oppressive silence, though not for the public, but for her brother. She found Charles alone in a small, cozy reading room. A letter penned by Elizabeth II rested on his lap. Without any preamble or lengthy introduction, she declared, "You cannot outweigh the truth." Charles offered no immediate reply. Then he looked up and spoke words filled with deep apprehension. "I don't fear the truth. I fear what it will leave behind." In that poignant moment, Anne realized that her brother was not resisting the inevitable course of events. He was merely desperately trying to shield his family from the impending upheaval. By the end of the second week of October, His Majesty had missed 4 consecutive scheduled engagements, an unprecedented occurrence. Prince William, now at Sandringham daily, subtly but confidently took the reins, demonstrating increasing responsibility. The public, of course, could not help but notice these changes. Journalists began referring to him as the acting sovereign, an unofficial title, yet one carrying significant weight in the public consciousness. Catherine, always distinguished by her impeccable poise and composure, carried out her ceremonial duties with dignity, but attentive observers noted a hidden tension in her posture, the kind of tension that arises when one prepares for changes they never desired or sought. Then came the call. At 3:24 a.m., William's secure phone, reserved for critical messages, rang. On the other end, a high-ranking advisor uttered 7 words that irrevocably changed everything. His Majesty has lost full cognitive clarity. It was not a physical death, but something very close to it. A moment when the king, reportedly clouded by medication and exhaustion, looked at Anne and asked a question full of desperate confusion. "Is my mother still waiting for her coronation?" This confusion was a heartbreaking sight, but its implications were purely constitutional. A monarch who could no longer distinguish past from present was, by definition, no longer fit to rule the state. Palace services reacted with astonishing swiftness. Medical records, confidential attestations of the monarch's health, were urgently and meticulously reviewed. Concurrently, skilled legal experts were brought in, their conclusions proving crucial. Finally, the sealed letter that Charles had prudently drafted months prior, anticipating possible scenarios, was opened. Within it, as numerous informed sources later confirmed, was a concise yet comprehensive 1-page instruction. In the event of cognitive incapacity, temporary authority is to be transferred to the Prince of Wales, with full consultative rights for Princess Anne. This document was not a traditional will, dictating the inheritance of property. Nor did it represent an act of abdication in the usual sense. The world was presented with something entirely unprecedented. A reigning monarch who had chosen to step back from active rule, not due to demise, but out of a conscious sense of duty to the nation. Even before full dawn broke, the first, barely perceptible yet critically important elements of this unprecedented transition were already set in motion. Sandringham residence was promptly closed to the public and staff. The royal helicopter, typically used for significant movements, was dispatched to Windsor, signaling the commencement of a new phase. Meanwhile, Camilla, her presence had suddenly vanished. Later, one of her aides, maintaining composure, reported that Camilla had discreetly left the country during the night, boarding a private jet bound for picturesque Florence. The official reason, stated by her press secretary, was the need to gather her thoughts during this difficult period. However, the true state of affairs was different. For many weeks, she had been waging an intense internal battle against the arrival of this very moment. Her resistance was not due to a lack of love for Charles, but a deep conviction that such a retreat from duty was tantamount to capitulation. And, it must be admitted, in some respects, her fears were not unfounded. Across the breadth of Britain, millions awoke to find the front page of the Telegraph, announcing an event that would forever enter the annals of history. The headline read, "The Crown Suspended. Prince William Assumes Temporary Authority." This was not the lavish coronation subjects had been accustomed to seeing for centuries. There were no triumphant fanfares of trumpets, no majestic robes embroidered with gold and precious stones unfurling. Yet for countless individuals, this event felt like something far more significant, like a tangible forward movement of history, a changing of eras unfolding right before their eyes. While the general public tried to comprehend and digest the sensational headline that would, without doubt, define a generation, Prince William assumes temporary authority. Behind the impenetrable palace walls, a far more subtle and delicate operation was unfolding, hidden from outside eyes. Palace structures, now operating in strict adherence to a protocol of quiet and discreet power transfer, had activated special procedures designed exclusively for resolving the most delicate and unprecedented scenarios. This concerned a situation where a living monarch, whose majesty and authority remained unquestionable, was deemed incapable of fully exercising their ruling functions, yet had not yet departed this world. In the narrow corridors of power, where every whisper held significance, the term now softly spoken was not the familiar abdication, carrying connotations of drama and finality, but a softer, more cautious definition: soft succession. In the north wing of Sandringham Palace, where routine once reigned, the dynamics of relationships and power had undergone radical changes. Prince William, who for many years had been the epitome of a diligent heir, patiently and uncomplainingly remaining in his father's shadow, now effectively became the direct manager of all the crown's daily functions. However, he did not step into this new role with ostentatious pomp or solemnity. On the contrary, his actions were marked by surprising restraint and even a certain modesty. He was often seen day after day in the same dark blue suit. His tie was slightly loosened, and noticeable dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights and tension. One close aide, observing him, aptly remarked that William looked not like a man eagerly seizing the reins of power, but rather like one accepting an incredibly heavy burden of responsibility, fully understanding its depth and significance. Princess Anne, a woman of unyielding character and sharp intellect, took her place as his closest and most trusted advisor. Their combined efforts, imbued with a deep understanding of state affairs, led to the formation of what some circles now referred to as a dual regency. This alliance was not officially formalized, nor did it bear a grand title, yet in practice, its effectiveness and significance were utterly evident. Anne, always characterized by a pragmatic approach to any issue, meticulously delved into the intricacies of palace protocol, serving as a liaison between the Privy Council and the powerful Church of England. Meanwhile, William, acutely aware of the heavy responsibility placed upon him, focused his energies on the most crucial task: stabilizing the public mood, which had been visibly shaken by recent events. Kate, in turn, assumed an equally vital but more unofficial role, becoming a living symbol of comfort for all of Britain. She tirelessly visited hospitals, supported charities, and met with armed forces veterans, and many saw in her actions a touching echo of the selfless work Elizabeth II undertook during the difficult war years. However, while work bustled within the palace walls, outside its majestic gates, disagreements brewed that threatened to undermine a fragile equilibrium. Queen Camilla's departure left more than just a symbolic void. It ignited a genuine rift, exposing hidden contradictions. Numerous sources confirmed that she adamantly insisted the letter not be opened, genuinely believing that Charles would undoubtedly recover and fully regain his capacity to rule. But when that invisible line was finally crossed, she made the decision to leave. Royal correspondents anxiously noted that her public relations team suddenly fell completely silent, and her long-serving, loyal lady-in-waiting quietly resigned, citing ethical discomforts. Windsor Castle staff whispered about a failed power play, which they believed was unfolding behind the scenes. Some claimed Camilla was preparing to become the temporary guardian of the monarchy herself, seeking a more dominant role as regent, an idea that Anne and Charles himself had reportedly rejected weeks before these events. Her absence during the transfer of power caused not only public confusion, but also a flurry of criticism in the press. For the first time since her marriage, Camilla's place in the monarchy seemed secondary, her significance called into question. And then, finally, the letter arrived. But not from Charles, rather from the late Queen Elizabeth II. It had been kept in a sealed envelope within the royal archives at Windsor, awaiting its moment. It was to be opened only if her son became incapacitated but remained alive. The message, believed to have been written in the last year of her life, contained, among other things, these prophetic words: "If succession falters, let mercy prevail. The crown is kept not by holding, but by knowing when to yield." The existence of this letter lent immense moral weight to the king's decision, and incontrovertibly confirmed the correctness of Anne and William's actions. The Queen's firm and unmistakable handwriting was emblazoned across the front pages of all major publications within hours, becoming public knowledge. People, though deeply saddened by the situation, gradually began to accept the fact that history was unfolding in real time not through death, but through a carefully considered and wise plan. On the international stage, a cascade of reactions immediately followed. The White House, demonstrating diplomatic finesse, issued an official statement expressing deep respect and admiration for the king's unwavering courage and the prince's steadfast sense of duty. Meanwhile, from the Vatican, Pope Francis personally sent his blessings, emphasizing spiritual support. In Commonwealth nations, particularly key states like Canada and Australia, lively debates reignited regarding constitutional independence. These discussions were not driven by a spirit of defiance or separatism. Rather, they became a sincere acknowledgement that a completely new chapter was being written in the annals of history, requiring a re-evaluation of traditional ties. Meanwhile, in the heart of the United Kingdom, Parliament convened for an exceptionally rare Sunday session. Its purpose was to discuss the complex constitutional contingencies arising during the period of royal medical suspension. Although these meetings were largely symbolic, they nevertheless clearly signaled that key governmental institutions were now officially and publicly expressing their support for the Prince of Wales, acknowledging his new role. However, despite this consolidation, certain circles within the establishment remained deeply anxious. Old Guard courtiers, those respected figures who had the honor of serving under Queen Elizabeth, viewed the rapid pace of change with apprehension. One of them, wishing to remain anonymous, frankly told the Times, "We have never faced anything like this before. We always prepared for the demise of a sovereign, not his slow fading." The British public, however, unlike some of the elite, reacted with noticeable sympathy rather than resistance. An express poll conducted by YouGov showed that over 71% of citizens fully agreed that William's decision to assume temporary powers was the only correct and respectful choice in the circumstances. At the same time, in the solitude of Sandringham, King Charles remained under constant medical observation. His clarity of mind constantly fluctuated, like a candle flame in the wind. But, according to aides, even in these moments, he invariably inquired about public reaction. In one of his rare flashes of lucidity, he reportedly whispered faintly to his doctor, "Are they angry?" The doctor, understanding the depth of his concern, replied firmly, "No, Your Majesty. They are proud." Late in the evening, as a final detail in the mosaic of rapidly unfolding events, came a quiet but deeply significant confirmation from the palace. The imperial state crown, that majestic symbol of monarchical power used in the most crucial moments of coronations, had been carefully transported from the impregnable walls of the Tower of London to historic Windsor Castle. The official explanation stated that this was for cleaning and to ensure the proper preservation of its historical value. However, behind the scenes of official statements, the symbolism of this act was so powerful it could not be ignored or downplayed. The crown was not on public display. It did not gleam in showcases. It did not rest upon the head of a reigning monarch. It simply waited, just as the entire nation, holding its breath, awaited its further destiny. And as the last rays of the setting sun glided across the damp, manicured lawns of Sandringham, Princess Anne and Prince William stood side by side in one of the palace drawing rooms. Not a single word was exchanged between them. Only a long, deeply understanding glance passed between brother and sister. They had both endured the heavy burden of legacy, the bitterness of loss, and now faced the most difficult decision of all. They were not merely preparing for the future, building plans and strategies. They were already living it, embracing its challenges, and shaping it with their decisions. However, despite all the internal quiet and solemnity of the transformations taking place within the palace walls, the outside world showed considerably less restraint. The very moment the esteemed publication The Times published the phrase "gentle succession," the course of history seemed to explode. Morning talk shows immediately cleared their schedules of planned programs. Special reports aired urgently on leading channels such as BBC, ITV, and even CNN. One headline, in bold letters adorning the front pages of all newspapers, loudly questioned, "The King is still alive, but who rules?" In the heart of London, at majestic Buckingham Palace, the usual chatter of tourists gave way to serious gatherings of people holding homemade placards with "We support William," and "Long live the King and the future King," emblazoned on them. Yet, public opinion was not universally benevolent towards the unfolding events. A rather vocal minority, comprising those loyal to a more traditional view of the monarchy, accused palace circles of a secret coup. Conspiracy theory forums literally caught fire, asserting that King Charles was being prematurely removed from power solely for political convenience. And it was then, without any warning whatsoever, that Queen Camilla's voice was heard once again. In an unexpected move, Camilla released a personal video message, not from the UK, but from a chateau nestled in the picturesque French countryside. In this video, exclusively shown on Sky News, she stated, "My husband remains king. He has not abdicated. The world should not rush to rewrite what still is." Her tone was composed and calm, yet the message was sharp and clear. She never once mentioned William or Anne by name, but it was perfectly obvious to whom her words were addressed. The video lasted only 97 seconds, and it had an internet-breaking effect. Within an hour, hashtags like Queen Camilla Speaks and Not My Regency rapidly trended on social media. At Sandringham, meanwhile, the atmosphere had noticeably intensified. William, according to reports, watched the video in complete silence. One of his aides described his state as visibly shaken, yet composed. Kate was consumed by fury, and Anne merely murmured calmly, "So be it." Despite all their meticulous preparations, no one had expected Camilla to so publicly challenge the unfolding plan. The Crown's public relations team immediately held an emergency meeting. Should they respond to this address? Would Charles himself issue a statement? Or would silence, Queen Elizabeth's method, prove more powerful and effective? Before a final decision was made, an event occurred that significantly influenced the course of affairs. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been a trusted advisor to Charles for decades, unexpectedly arrived at Sandringham. His visit was not for official ceremonies. On the contrary, he came for counsel. During a confidential meeting with Charles, William, and Anne, he reportedly reread aloud excerpts from Queen Elizabeth's sealed letter, reminding the family members that the Crown's strength lies in its restraint. Following this, he appeared before media representatives alongside William and uttered just one sentence: "The King has entrusted his son. Let us not question the love that binds them." This concise but deeply moving message once again shifted public sentiment. Commentators praised the palace for a wise and measured transfer of power, and public opinion polls decisively swung in William's favor. Nevertheless, the societal divide was palpable. Some members of the aristocracy, the so-called Old Guard, felt alienated by the disruption of established traditions. Lady Rosamond Devo, who had long supported Charles, stated in an interview with The Telegraph, "We were not taught to watch our monarchs fade. We were taught to bury them with crowns intact." For the younger generation, however, this was perceived as a sign of necessary evolution. On TikTok, thousands of creators shared videos celebrating the monarchy's ability to modernize while maintaining its dignity. Many even reposted an old clip from decades earlier, where a young William addresses his mother, Diana, saying, "I don't want to be king." Now, beneath this video, the caption read, "He didn't want to, but he rose anyway." Back at Sandringham, the public's clamor filtered through the thick walls of the residence. Anne maintained close contact with her brother, who reportedly regained clarity of mind for a brief hour that evening. During this time, Charles requested a private conversation with William. Staff were absent. No records were kept. However, after this meeting, William was seen walking alone on the estate, his shoulders slumped, his expression unreadable. When an aide inquired if everything was all right, he simply replied, "It's his legacy. I just hope I am worthy to carry it." Later that night, Charles asked for one last favor. He wished for the imperial state crown, which had been moved to Windsor for safekeeping, to be brought to Sandringham, but not to be worn. Instead, he asked for it to be placed in the chapel, under the same stained-glass window that once bathed Queen Elizabeth in morning light. This was a deeply symbolic gesture, a final act of reverence for the institution he had faithfully served, and which he now gently released. For, while the nation debated, while factions formed, while Camilla defended herself, and Anne solidified her position, Charles found inner peace. He was not surrendering. He was granting succession. And, in doing so, he passed on something far more enduring than a crown: clarity. By the next morning, it was evident that the British monarchy had embarked on a completely new, uncharted path. This was not caused by the demise of a reigning sovereign, but was the result of an unprecedented step by a living monarch who did not abdicate but merely temporarily withdrew from active rule, acknowledging the necessity of such a decision. A dignified and noble transfer of power had occurred, devoid of both the solemnity of a coronation and the sorrow of a funeral. As one commentator aptly noted, it was a moment suspended between an end and a beginning. The British media, usually prone to sharp criticism during periods of royal uncertainty, this time displayed a surprisingly respectful and restrained tone. The Guardian characterized the events as a quiet revolution in succession. The Times dedicated an entire spread to a piece under the intriguing headline, "The Regency We Were Never Told About, But Always Feared." Even the usually sensational tabloids, like The Sun, opted for a serious approach over spectacle, placing only the concise phrase, "He is still," on their front page. Our King. At the center of this profound national re-evaluation of monarchical traditions stood Prince William, a figure who, though not yet bearing the title of monarch, had ceased to be merely the heir to the throne. His first public address as acting sovereign was concise. The video was recorded in a cozy study at Sandringham Palace, where, slightly out of camera view, Catherine was silently present. The prince's voice was calm and measured, every word carefully chosen. "My father remains our sovereign, our unwavering strength, and our moral compass," he stated. "I act now not in place of his will, but in full accordance with it." The prince expressed deep gratitude to the public for their understanding. He also thanked the medical team for their tireless care and professionalism. He then did something quite unusual for a member of the royal family. He addressed the nation directly, not only as a prince, but also as a man, as a son. "To every son watching his father prematurely fade, I say, I share your feelings. To every family navigating the grief in this uncertain gray space between tender hope and inevitable farewell, we walk this path together." This heartfelt message resonated unusually deeply with the public. Social media was instantly flooded with messages of support, not only from various parts of the UK but from all continents. Heads of Commonwealth states immediately expressed their solidarity. The Prime Ministers of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand issued official statements emphasizing their respect for both King Charles and Prince William. However, attention to this event was not limited to political institutions. Prominent church leaders, respected academics, and even representatives of youth organizations began openly praising the monarchy for its displayed humility and foresight. "This is what generational leadership should look like," read one of many editorials. Queen Camilla, notably, remained silent, with no public appearances since her initial video message. No new messages had followed. Her press office politely declined all requests for interviews with media representatives. A source close to the royal court reported that Her Majesty was in a state of deep reflection, secluded at Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire, in the company of only a few select longtime friends. Her sister, Princess Anne, now having achieved almost cult status in the public eye, tirelessly performed her state duties with the meticulous precision of a military commander and the profound compassion of a sister. She refrained from any public statements, but her actions served as eloquent testimony to her devotion. She held meetings with the clergy, carefully reviewed protocol updates, and facilitated the seamless transfer of ceremonial duties to Prince William. As for King Charles, his physical condition, though still vulnerable, remained stable. He no longer signed official papers, attended meetings, or delved into foreign policy matters. But one activity he dedicated himself to every day: reading numerous letters from citizens, from school children, from veterans, from those who thanked him not for being king, but for showing the world how one could step down with grace and dignity. Among the many messages, one stood out, filled with genuine warmth, reportedly written by a 12-year-old child from Manchester, which read, "Dear King Charles, I know you are tired. Thank you for showing that even kings can be human. It makes you stronger in my eyes." And in a secluded corner of the royal chapel, where the imperial crown now rested in a glass case, curious tourists and deeply moved citizens gathered. Some offered prayers, others openly wept, and still others simply stood in reverent silence, as if touching the very essence of history unfolding and being rewritten before their eyes. It was in this space, not in a throne room, not on a battlefield, that the institution of monarchy experienced its rebirth, not through a display of power, but through an expression of profound humanity and tenderness. As the sun dipped below the Norfolk horizon, casting long, golden sponge shadows across Sandringham's velvet lawns, a deep silence settled over the estate. It was not the silence of grief, nor the solemn hum of a coronation, but something far more unique: the peace of a legacy passed by conscious choice, not by tragedy. In the sacred solitude of the chapel, the imperial state crown rested under a transparent protective dome, literally unclaimed yet deeply revered, remaining untouched. Its presence served as a powerful symbol not of a power vacuum, but of the deepest reverence and respect for history and the institution. Prince William, not claiming immediate ascension to the throne, nevertheless bore a colossal burden of responsibility, thereby presenting the world with a truly rare and valuable lesson. True leadership is not about grasping for ultimate power, but about the willingness to carry its weight and responsibility for the sake of others. This strikingly quiet and seamless transition, devoid of the usual pomp of fanfares, the mournful toll of funeral bells, and solemn proclamations, became an unequivocal and living testament to the foundational values that King Charles had tirelessly advocated for decades: principles of restraint, a profound sense of duty, and genuine care for the environment. Just as he had for decades persistently urged the world to treat our planet Earth with care and responsibility, he now taught us all a priceless lesson on how to tread delicately and respectfully on history's sacred pages, shaping its future. This situation holds a profound lesson for every subsequent generation. True dignity does not require a display of dominance or absolute power. A genuine legacy is shaped not only by the duration of our reign or leadership, but far more importantly, by how wisely and timely we are able to relinquish the reins of power. In our modern era, where there is often a desperate clinging to authority, widespread clamor, and a clear unwillingness to yield, King Charles stepped aside, demonstrating exceptional grace, unwavering courage, and a deep, sincere love for the institution to which he dedicated his entire life and service. And now, as the entire nation of Britain seems to hold its breath and then exhale with relief, we are presented with the image of a crown that rests not on the brow of a reigning monarch, but, figuratively speaking, in the safe hands of a son patiently awaiting his turn.